Number 9. Soviet T-34 Tank. Developed during the early stages of World War II, the Soviet T-34-76 tank became well known for its mobility, armor protection, and firepower. It would lose its effectiveness later on in the conflict, but when the Nazis first came face to face with it during their invasion of the Soviet Union, they were shocked by what it was capable of. In 2016, one of the few surviving examples of the T-34-76 was pulled from the Don River in southern Russia's Voronezh region. For more than 50 years, it had sat at the river bottom 23 feet beneath the water's surface. The discovery disproved the belief among experts that all the T-34 tanks produced at the Stalingrad tractor factory had been destroyed in battles long ago. There are two main stories about how the tank ended up in the river. One version, based on local legend, claims that Soviet troops sank the vehicle to avoid it falling into enemy hands. But the powerful tank was not disarmed when it was found, indicating that this was probably not what happened. Another explanation holds that the tank fell into the river while traveling on a pontoon bridge. Based on the evidence, this seems much more likely to be the case. The tank was in surprisingly good condition for having spent more than a half a century in the murky river. In fact, officials even said that they believed it could run again after its decades-long hiatus. Number 8. Clotilda slave ship. As the 400th anniversary of the transatlantic slave trade approached in 2019, the Slave Wrecks Project, SWP, announced the discovery of the last slave ship to arrive in the U.S., a two-masted schooner called the Clotilda. The vessel transported 110 African captives from what is now the country of Benin to Alabama in 1856. After arriving in the U.S., the Clotilda's captain, William Foster, ordered for the ship to be burned and sank to conceal evidence of participation in the slave trade, which the federal government had banned in 1808. Rumors about the wreck's existence had been whispered about for decades, but remained unproven until divers finally found it buried in mud in Alabama's Mobile Delta. The water wasn't very deep, but the conditions were treacherous and visibility was almost zero. Researchers were recently surprised to discover that the wreck remains mostly intact. As it turns out, most of the ship didn't actually catch fire, and the mud that it's buried in has helped to preserve it. The upper portion of the Clotilda is long gone, but 2/3 of it survives. This includes the area below deck and a pen that was used for holding African captives, where conditions were indescribably dismal. Human beings were stashed like cargo into this unlit, unventilated area where they languished for weeks on end. After the Civil War ended, 32 of the captives who were brought to the U.S. on the Clotilda formed a community called Africatown, USA. Located a few miles north of downtown Mobile, it's home to an estimated 100 descendants of the people from the Clotilda who helped spark the movement to find the sunken ship. Plans for the wreck remain up in the air. Raising it would be expensive, and the vessel might be too delicate to be pulled from the water. Descendant, a documentary about the Clotilda, will premiere in January at the annual Sundance Film Festival. Number 7. Ancient Skull. Two kayakers got the shock of a lifetime last summer when they discovered a human skull along the Minnesota River roughly 110 miles west of Minneapolis. They notified Renville County Sheriff Scott Hable, who turned the skull over to a medical examiner, thinking it might be linked to a missing person cold case or a murder. From there, it landed in the hands of a forensic anthropologist with the FBI, who determined through radiocarbon dating that the skull belonged to a young man who likely lived between 6000 and 5500 BC. The news came as a surprise to authorities, according to Hable, who spoke with CBS News following the discovery. He further explained that the anthropologist identified a depression in the skull that may point toward the person's cause of death. Hable posted photos of the discovery only to be met with backlash from Native Americans, who were quick to point out that posting images of the remains was culturally offensive. He removed the post and clarified that his office did not mean any disrespect whatsoever and that the skull was turned over to local tribal officials. Unfortunately, the controversy continued from there. In a statement, Minnesota Indian Affairs Council Cultural Resources Specialist Dylan Gutsch accused authorities of failing to inform the council or the state archaeologist of the discovery as required by state law. He also criticized Hable for describing the remains as a little piece of history and not identifying the individual as a Native American. Anthropologist Kathleen Blue told the New York Times that the skull definitely belonged to an ancestor from one of the area's modern-day tribes. She went on to say that the man likely ate a diet of plants, deer, fish, turtles, and freshwater mussels. Blue conceded that experts don't know much about the region during that time period, but that the glaciers from the last ice age had retreated just a few thousand years earlier, so there probably weren't many people wandering around what is now Minnesota. Number 6. Messages in a bottle. Caitlin Moody and her husband Austin were enjoying some quality time in their boat on South Carolina's Lake Murray when they spotted a wine bottle floating around in the water. Thinking it was just trash, Austin picked it up with plans to dispose of it properly, at which point Caitlin noticed that something was inside the bottle. She opened it up and found 2 notes wrapped in a plastic bag and which seemed to be an anonymous sender's well wishes for the finder. One note said, "Family is everything," while another said, "Do everything you can to help others in need and to be happy." The couple posted photos and details on Facebook in hopes of finding out who wrote the messages. While many commenters saw the notes as a much-needed display of compassion in an increasingly cruel world, others, including local authorities, were concerned about the environmental and safety hazards of tossing a glass bottle into a lake. Speaking with local station WLTX, Lake Murray Association President Captain Mike Kirk pointed out that hitting the bottle at a high rate of speed could damage a boat or cause an injury. He suggested spreading messages of positivity online or in some other way that doesn't pose any physical dangers. The Moody's kept the bottle and its heartfelt words of kindness as a memento, but they still haven't managed to trace its origins. Have you ever found a message in a bottle? What did it say? Tell us in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 5. Lost Spanish Galleon. A Spanish galleon called the Santo Cristo de Burgos was en route from the Philippines to Mexico in 1693 with a load of silk, porcelain, and beeswax when it mysteriously vanished. Local legend among the indigenous population in what is now northern Oregon has long claimed that around the same time, a huge ship wrecked along the Nehalem Spit Dune near the mouth of the Columbia River. Scientists recently discovered the ship's ruins following a 15-year-long search along the Oregon coast, where pieces of wood, porcelain, and other evidence had been washing up for years. In fact, part of the ship's upper deck had even remained visible until the 1920s. Stories about the so-called beeswax wreck circulated, only to be ultimately proven as true amid rapidly circulating tales of treasure and lost gold. In addition to the information gleaned from local legend, scientists were tipped off by a commercial fisherman named Craig Andes, who spotted bits of wood in some sea caves and quickly determined that he thought it was ship timber. He notified a group called the Maritime Archaeology Society, MAS, in 2020, and at first officials believed Andes had simply spotted driftwood. But testing revealed that it was from an ancient hardwood tree known as Ancardiaceae, and that it was felled around the year 1650. Evidence further showed that the wreck was already there when a 25-foot wave struck the coast in 1700, narrowing down the likelihood that the ship was the long-missing Santo Cristo de Burgos. Speaking with National Geographic, cultural director of the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz, Robert Kenta, cited the discovery as proof that his ancestors knew what they were talking about all along. Number 4. Mammoth Tusk. A group of college professors were floating down the Kuyukuk River near Coldfoot, Alaska during a research trip when they spotted a woolly mammoth tusk sticking out along the riverbank. The water was flowing high and fast, but University of Virginia UVA researcher Adrienne Galey managed to snap a photo while she passed by the object. During the last ice age, this part of Alaska was unglaciated. It was home to many grazing animals, including mammoths, and while the sight wasn't exactly surprising, it was still fascinating to see in person, according to UVA researcher Howie Epstein, who was also on the trip. Patrick Druckenmiller, who works as the director of the University of Alaska Museum of the North, told National Public Radio that the region was an ideal habitat for woolly mammoths and that the area is famous worldwide for its abundance of Ice Age animal remains. He said that as things currently stand, it doesn't seem like a safe idea to try retrieving the tusk, but that if it fell out from its current position, it would only be right to take it to a museum and have it curated. Number 3. Illegal liquor. Police in Rajpur, India recently discovered 20 drums of illegal liquor floating along a river in the village of Bandarkash. They received a tip from an informant about a liquor manufacturing operation along the banks of the river, only to investigate and find no outward evidence of such. Acting on the suspicion that there was more to the story, the officers investigated the river itself and found the drums floating in deep waters tied to a rope. The vessels contained 2,000 liters of a substance called mahua lahan, which is used for making raw liquor. Authorities also found other liquor-making components which they seized and destroyed. This recent case highlights the ongoing problem of dangerous illegal liquor being made and sold throughout India. It's cheap, making it a popular choice among the country's impoverished masses, but it also often contains toxic and potentially deadly chemicals. And while people are aware of this, many are willing to take their chances for just 10 cents per glass, or roughly 1/3 the cost of a lawfully concocted beer. Civilians have died in droves from bad batches of moonshine in recent years, owing to the tendency of illegal brewers to add rubbing alcohol or methanol to the booze to increase quantity and maximize their profits. Both national and regional authorities are doing what they can to get the problem under control, but it almost seems like they're fighting a losing battle as people cave to the temptation of affordable and addictive hooch. To make matters worse, some officials have even been convicted of participating in or at least facilitating the illicit trade rather than doing their job of protecting people from its dangers. Number 2. The lost city of Kaku. As temperatures in Iraq spike amid an ongoing drought hitting as high as 113 degrees Fahrenheit, residents are left with no other choice than to drain the Mosul reservoir for irrigation water. The decreasing water levels recently revealed the ruins of an ancient settlement believed to be the so-called lost city of Kaku. An excavation has identified ancient towers, clay tablets, and pottery vessels along with 10-foot-high walls that were found standing despite being made from sun-dried mud. Experts believe that the wall was preserved thanks to a layer of rubble that preserved it following a destructive earthquake. Archaeologist Ivana Puljes told the UK-based news outlet The Mirror that the particular building that the team dug up was once used for storing enormous quantities of goods. Meanwhile, archaeologist Peter Feltze described the survival of the clay tablets as close to a miracle. Additionally, the team found 22-foot-high walls covered in vibrant blue and red paintings. They believe that the settlement belonged to the mysterious Mitanni Empire, which once ruled over a vast area encompassing parts of modern-day Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Not much is known about the powerful but short-lived dynasty, and researchers are hoping that the recently discovered city will help them better understand the obscure ancient culture. Number 1. Ancient garbage. A prehistoric bone tool found in Australia's Lower Murray River known as Murrawong Bone Point may date back to some 8,000 years ago according to a study that was published last year. Discovered in 2008, it's the first artifact of its kind to be recovered from the river since the 1970s. It's a reminder to experts of the limited research that has been done on bone tools and non-stone artifacts in the country. Interest in bone artifacts was limited until relatively recently, in the words of study co-author Amy Roberts, who spoke with the Academic Times. So there's a lot we don't know about them, she said, explaining that researchers have traditionally been more interested in stone than bone, partially because stone stays preserved more easily. The paper, written by Roberts and her colleagues, serves as a sort of groundwork for future bone artifact studies in Australia. It points out that the bone point resembles others that the continent's ancient people used as cloak pins. The artifact itself, which was likely fashioned from a wallaby or kangaroo foreleg, appears to have been discarded by its owner, rather than purposely buried, indicating that it may have broken and lost its usefulness. Roberts conceded that because the artifact is broken, experts can't be 100% sure about its interpretation, especially since they have very little to compare it to in terms of similar findings along the South Australian part of the Murray River. Thanks for watching. Which one of these discoveries surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.